So this lecture is entitled, How to Win the War on Cancer, right? So we're going to focus on those anti-cancer foods, how to prepare them, how to eat them, if you didn't know how to eat by now. And we're going to cement those superfoods that give you super protection. And the reason super protection is so important, the reason it's so important to learn about these superfoods and how to utilize them in your diet is because preventing cancer is the most important thing to do if you want to live to be 100 years old in great health. It's the most important thing to do because it's so easy to prevent heart disease. You can even eat unhealthy for the first 60 years of your life and then change your diet and prevent heart disease. But to prevent cancer is harder. You have to really start eating healthier earlier, or you have to eat super healthy. Because most people haven't eaten healthy the first half of their lives. They've eaten so bad that they've caused DNA damage, methylation defects, epigenetic changes. In other words, cumulative damage happens to the cell, builds up to the point where cells go haywire, go crazy, and become cancerous. They build up over time, and unless you do something to cause that damage to go the opposite direction, repair itself, it's going to eventually cause a problem. And of course, we have a new generation raised on processed foods, taking in toxins, barbecue, fast foods, chemicalized foods that increases the risk of cancer, and they can't moderately change their diet. They've got to go all the way to nutritional excellence if they really want to be protected. So that's what this is about. And I want to make clear that cancer is unnatural, did not occur throughout human history. Breast cancer did not occur in cave women times. And we know that because throughout medical history, we haven't seen these cancers occur except in small amounts with very wealthy kings and queens and royalty who overate food and overate animal products. Relatively, the masses of people never got cancer. When we autopsied, more than 100 Egyptian mummies who died of natural causes, they found one case of cancer in the 100 Egyptian mummies. Cancer was very, very rare in early times. Now it's a leading cause of death. So we're talking here that even in the 17th century was the first case of cancer where they found to be more prevalent was scrotal cancer in chimney sweeps because we're working along the smokestacks. We didn't have childhood cancer back then. Breast cancer and prostate cancer were unknown. And Hodgkin's disease was first mentioned in the medical literature in the 1830s. So what I'm saying right now is these are diseases of modern civilization, chemicalized food, overeating calories, and overconsumption of animal products, which never occurred in human history. Throughout most of the population of the world ate under 10% of calories from animal products. And then even for example, throughout up to the 1960s in the Asian countries, they ate about 6 to 7% of calories from animal products. We were eating more than that, of course, back in the 1920s. By the time we got to the 1950s, we were up to 30% of calories from animal products, but the Asian countries were still only up below 15% at that point. So we're seeing here that a massive change in the amount of oils, the amount of sugars, the amount of processed foods being consumed. And in the olden days, people didn't smoke cigarettes, right? There wasn't breast cancer and lung cancer in primitive times. And I'm talking a lot about breast cancer, and that's generally because most men with prostate cancer die of heart attacks. When they have prostate cancer, the vast majority die of heart disease, not prostate cancer. It's more slowly growing, generally speaking, and breast cancer and prostate cancer have the same causes. Heightened estrogen exposure in both sexes increases the risk of both breast and prostate cancer. So what I say about breast cancer right now also applies to prostate cancer, pretty much. We're mostly focusing on breast cancer. And the point I'm making here on this slide is that we can put billions of dollars to fight the war on cancer, to look for some magic pill that people can take to reduce the risk of death from cancer, and it's never going to work. It can't work. We can't give ourselves a pill so we can smoke 3 packs of cigarettes a day with impunity and not get lung cancer. It's not going to ever happen. It's just a waste of money and time and trying to extract money from our population to give it into the drug companies and the medical community, tricking people like we're just this close to winning the war on cancer. It's going on forever like that. And we're not going to have a pill where people can eat dairy products and sugar and meats and fried foods and not get breast cancer. It's never going to happen. It's okay because we know how to not get breast cancer right now. We can do it right now. We can wipe out breast cancer and win the war on cancer immediately. Start tomorrow. But just so you're aware that the amount of people that are killed by breast cancer has not changed since the 1930s. In spite of medical care, mammograms, chemotherapy, radiation, whatever it is we're doing, the same amount of people die at the same age. Nothing what we've done has changed anything at all. Matter of fact, people have this, I should say, belief system in mammograms, thinking that mammograms are saving lives, when we look at studies not done by American radiologists, not done by Americans who have a very biased viewpoint. We look at independent people like the Cochrane analysis and Norwegian studies. When they study mammogram practices, they follow in populations, whether they have mammograms or not, has almost zero effect on allowing women to live longer. The amount of people that are helped by mammograms are almost perfectly balanced with the amount of people that are hurt by chemotherapy or by cancer interventions. So the chemotherapy can cause heart disease, heart attacks, other cancers to occur, early death from other causes. And what I'm saying right now is even though some people are helped by mammograms, but the amount of people that are hurt are almost the same amount. The overall effect on deaths are negligible. The point is most of the benefits in Americans' claim on mammograms have to do with lead time bias, because if you have a cancer, you don't get a mammogram and you find you have a cancer at some point, you detect from symptoms, a lump in your breast, then you have that time where until survival, maybe you'll pass away, 5 years later. You think that you've survived with your cancer 5 years, but now if we can detect the cancer earlier through screening like mammograms, and now it looks like you're surviving 10 years, it looks like the mammogram made you survive longer because now you're living 10 years with breast cancer, not 5 years. But all you did is diagnose the cancer earlier. You're still going to die at the same point that you would have died had you not had the cancer diagnosed. Did you follow that? In the vast majority of cases, it can't be argued that screening does nothing, which means that we have to prevent cancer, not just try to detect it, because the time you detect it, it's very late. The cancer's been there generally an average of 12 to 15 years already before the cells can multiply enough so it can be a large enough lump that's bigger than that's more than half the size of a pencil eraser that can be visualized by the human eye. So a radiologist has to see it with his own eye on the film, and if he can't see it, doesn't mean it's not there. You actually have cancer for many, many, many years before it can be seen. And by that time it can be seen, the vast majority of these cancers have spread throughout your body, and they can't be the fact that they've spread throughout your body can't be detected because then they're too small. Whether you have a lumpectomy or whether you have CAT scans or some other bone scans, they're still not the spread is still not detectable. Cancer screening that tells you, it's localized to the breast, doesn't mean it's localized to the breast. The point is that if we're really going to stop these cancer deaths, we have to not just detect it when it's late, but stop the cancer cells from replicating and causing a problem. And that you can do before the cells coalesce, because the more the cells, or smaller amounts of cells, are more the body's immune system is more able to attack and destroy them and cause apoptosis. A healthy immune system can better detect and destroy earlier stage cancers. Again, early stage cancers are not detected by mammograms. So breast cancer deaths in the 50 to 70 age range, that's the age range where we don't want people to die. We don't want women to die between 60 years old and 55 years old, because that's the prime of their life. We should be able to live between 90 and 105 years of age. So if women were dying of breast cancer at 95, it wouldn't be so bad. But they're dying in their 50s and 60s, so that is bad. And look if we compare countries around the world, 3 per 100,000, 4 per 100,000, US and England 120 per 100,000, it shows that it's not genetics, it's lifestyle. If it was genetics, the other countries would have the same rate of cancer deaths as we have in this country, right? It can't be predominantly genetics if people move here from other countries and then eventually develop the same rate we have because they adopt our habits. It's all habit. And we know if we take statistics, and this data was cultivated in before 1970, when populations around the world were still eating a lot of vegetables. So this is when we tracked certain countries, how much vegetation, how much plants, how much fruits and vegetables they were eating. And you can see United States pretty low, but Venezuela, Greece, Korea pretty high, Thailand, Laos pretty high. more fruits and vegetables. That was before 1970. If we track those numbers today, the amount of vegetables consumed as a portion of total calories is way down because they're eating more dairy and more oil and more burgers and more fries and more pizza and more soda, just like we are. They're not eating that diet anymore. So I had to go back to the 1970s to get these statistics. And then we plot the amount of produce they ate against the people dying of cancer. You could see that more produce, less cancer, less produce, more cancer. Pretty straight graph, right? You understand that the red means you're dying of those diseases to heart disease and cancer, which is pretty much says it all, right? Eat more produce. Now, you guys know the first principle of the Nutritarian diet. You've all been to 2 of my lectures already, right? You all should be able to say it in your sleep by now. That means eat a diet with a high micronutrient density and don't overeat on calories, right? We want to eat a diet with a high nutritional bang per caloric buck. When you eat a diet with a high nutritional bang per caloric buck, it suppresses your appetite. You don't feel like eating as much food. Go for those nutrients. It'll naturally make you feel full and fill up your receptors. Some things turn down the appestat and some things turn up the appestat. When you don't eat nutrients and you eat processed foods, it turns up the appestat, especially oil. The so-called health food is olive oil, right? Flaxseed oil, olive oil, coconut oil, all these alternative medicine nonsensical myths. Why everybody's still so fat and they think they're healthy. Pouring oil on their food, pouring extra calories right on their food. You take a 50 calories of lettuce in a bowl with all the vegetables on top, almost no calories in there. You take then 300 calories of oil and pour it on top. 300 calories of dressing on 50 calories of vegetables. You might as well forget the vegetables and just drink the dressing straight from the bottle. But the second principle of a Nutritarian diet is that diet has to be hormonally favorable. We're talking here about estrogen, and fat cells produce estrogen, and fat cells block the uptake of insulin, increasing a higher rate of insulin production with everything you eat. So eating sweets drives insulin. And then the last thing you learned earlier today was that sweets do raise IGF-1 as well. So when you eat sweets and high glycemic carbohydrates, like white rice, like bread and marshmallows and whatever it is people are eating, pizza, croissants, bagels, they're just shoving baked goods in their mouth, the same as eating sugar, but they don't just raise insulin. The high glycemic carbohydrates also raise IGF-1, but not as much as animal protein does. Animal protein raises IGF-1 more, and animal protein raises insulin, but sugar raises insulin more than animal protein, and animal protein raises IGF-1 more than sugar. You follow that? They both get elevated. If you really want to have that sandwich to maximize your chance of getting cancer, then you want to raise IGF-1 and sugar both by eating bread and meat and bread and cheese and macaroni and cheese and heroes and spaghetti and meatballs. Wherever you mix carbohydrates with animal products, then you have the real punch to get cancer. That's the diet style that supports cancer the most. Desserts, cheesecake, ice cream and meat, the way. So IGF-1 is important to know about because it controls your health destiny and how you age. You're going to be younger. Monkeys that have mildly caloric restricted have lower levels of IGF-1 all through middle age, and the 60-year-old monkey looks like they're 15 years old. And they compare even the muscle tissue, the bone tissue. The secret to not aging or aging as slow as possible is having IGF-1 be as low as possible all through life. And they put humans in the biosphere years ago, and they tried to caloric restrict them by 30% to see if their IGF-1 would go down, to see if they could mimic the biological benefits that we see in monkeys when they are caloric restricted. But the IGF-1 in the humans put in the biosphere did not go down because they were still feeding them a diet with 30% of calories from animal products. These scientists noticed that they didn't see low IGF-1s in the favored range until they looked at vegan populations. But the thing with IGF-1 is that lower levels make you age slower and prevent cancer. But once you pass the age of 80, 85, then the absorption of biological protein goes down. And then if your IGF-1 starts to drop too low, it could also increase the risk of cancer from your IGF-1 going too low. So usually with most things in life, both too much is bad and too little is bad. There's some range in the center that's usually best. You following that? So if you have no growth hormone, you could become frail, your immune system can become depleted, and you could have increased risk of cancer. This is why some of those high carbohydrate vegan diets, macrobiotic diets, some diets advocated very low in fat, where people tell you eat rice and potatoes and don't eat nuts or don't eat oil, you know what I mean? Those can cause more frailty and are not, how should I say, safe for growing children and toddlers because their protein and fat is too low, and they're not safe for their elderly because their protein and fat is too low. A Nutritarian diet is a style of eating, a vegan diet style that includes a lot of green vegetables, nuts and seeds, beans, higher protein plant foods that are associated in studies with longer life in vegans. That's why, one of the reasons why, in the Seventh-day Adventist II study, those Seventh-day Adventists that lived the longest were those eating nuts and seeds and greens, because it gives you more protein exposure on a vegan diet. The low-fat vegans didn't live as long because the low-fat vegans not eating nuts and seeds aren't getting enough protein in the aging process, and that diet's not designed well for those extremes of life or for the serious athlete in the middle range of life who needs the more protein and fat in their diet. You following that? We eat hemp seeds and sunflower seeds and almonds and beans and green vegetables. All are high protein foods. Actually, green vegetables are like 40 to 50% protein. A cup of spinach is like 50% protein. A hamburger is only 30% protein. Beans are like 30% protein, but because some of their carbohydrate is not accessible to the body, they're actually, percent of total calories that actually is absorbed is closer to 40% protein. They're a high protein food. Green vegetables and beans and seeds are high protein food. So how come those proteins from plants don't raise IGF-1 to the dangerous levels like animal proteins do, even if the animal proteins have less protein? How come? Right, because somebody said because they're complete protein, because the animal products are biologically complete. And we learned in grade school that biologically complete proteins are more favorable because they make a rat grow faster. But now we've learned that the faster the animal grows when it's young, the shorter its lifespan, and growth is equated with aging. We want our children to grow slower, not have puberty at age 12. We don't want women to start menstruating at 10, 11, and 12 because if we feed them a diet to make them grow faster, to raise IGF-1 too high, and they go through puberty earlier, then they have higher risk of breast cancer. And if you get your beard in when you're a male and you're starting to get mature earlier and grow faster, then you have a higher risk of prostate cancer. We don't want our children to grow as slow as possible. We had it all mixed up. We thought years ago we should feed our kids to maximize their growth, and now we realize we messed up. The faster they grow, the younger they die. The faster they grow, the faster they're aging. We want our children to grow as slow as possible, not as fast as possible. When we eat animal proteins, because they're so biologically complete, they flood the body with so much biologically complete protein at one time that the body has to overshoot the amount of growth hormone it makes. When you eat plant proteins, they still have enough protein, but they come in not as biologically complete. So it takes time for the body to make them biologically complete. And the body doesn't waste its effort making biologically complete proteins out of incomplete proteins it doesn't need. It's not going to make them biologically complete if it doesn't need to. It only makes the amount, it only biologically completes the amount it needs to make the amount of hormones it needs. So it doesn't overshoot the amount of hormone it makes. Do you follow me? The body has the ability to make biologically incomplete proteins complete. It can complete them when it wants to. It can just suck in some more protein from the digestive tract by breaking down bacteria, or by the storage sites along the villi where amino acids are stored, or by absorbing some of the sloughed off cell. But it only absorbs enough of that to slowly complete the protein it needs. So the IGF-1 doesn't get too low and doesn't get too high. It gets right in that perfect range. And the link between IGF-1 and cancer is very solid in the scientific literature. No nutritional scientists disagree with that. Even the paleo guys advocating high protein diets don't disagree that IGF-1 promotes aging and cancer. They just argue that dairy products promote it more than meat does, so it makes meat safe. Or sugar and dairy make it worse than promote IGF-1 more than meat does. They're making some, which is not true. Sugar and dairy and meat all promote IGF-1. They're thinking if you just don't eat the dairy products, you're good enough. But it's true that dairy products do raise IGF-1 more powerfully than meat do, and the countries with the highest breast cancer rates, see, we're seeing that breast and prostate cancer are very closely linked to IGF-1 production. intimately. You can turn on cancer or turn it off with IGF-1. But the countries with the highest rate of breast cancer are definitely the countries that eat the most dairy products and drink the most milk, because that is a factor promoting breast cancer. There's a vast amount of difference between, and as you know from the earlier slide, the United States is lower, but among other countries, the United States is still one of the highest amount of breast cancer. These are the super high breast cancer countries because they all eat a lot of dairy products. Now, is there one feature of cancer cells that every cancer cell has? Yes, there is. All cancer cells have increased activity of mTOR. It means it's a master regulator of cell growth, and it's revved up. It's upregulated in every cell that becomes cancer. 100% of advanced cancers, especially those life-threatening cancers, all have increased mTOR. So the question is, what raises mTOR and what lowers mTOR? Let's look at these factors that keep it down to prevent cancer. They are what you've been learning this whole weekend. Protein restriction keeps it down. Low glycemic exposure, low exposure to sugar, maple syrup and honey, and white flour products, and white rice, and white potato. Here, look, the point here is that we're talking about the American diet, which is high in protein and high in glycemic carbohydrates, both, and of course, less calories. You have to have excess calories or you can't promote cancer. You have to be a little too big, a little too fat, or a little too large. And building that extra muscle in the gym as a power lifter or a professional weightlifter promotes cancer. Even excess muscle promotes cancer, not just excess fat. Because to get that excess muscle, you had to eat a lot of extra protein. You had to produce a lot of IGF-1. When you're weightlifting on a Nutritarian diet, if I'm weightlifting, I can get a little bigger muscle. My muscle will locally produce IGF-1. It'll actually suck IGF-1 out of central circulation to utilize in the muscle tissue when I'm exercising. So exercise demands IGF-1, but it actually does so by lowering peripheral IGF-1, by sucking out IGF-1 from your body into the muscle tissues, keeping your IGF-1 low so it's not going to stimulate and cause damage to the prostate or breast. But when you eat a lot, when you do exercise on a high-protein diet, you get excessive growth, and to get to your body to be 250 pounds or 300 pounds, then you could still be lean and still have high rates of cancer. That's why the shortest-lived people in North America are linebackers on football teams, because they ate a diet to try to get as large as they possibly could, with their parents edging them on. Actually, if you're bigger than your parents were, in other words, you can determine the height of your children by measuring your height and what the percentile you'd be among men and the percentile you'd be among women, and then average it out and see a kind of height predicted, your children's probably predicted height. If your child exceeds that height of the parents, then he's going to be at high risk of cancer, generally speaking. And that's happened for generations. Each generation has gotten taller and taller because more exposure to protein earlier in life, which is going to accelerate aging and make them have more cancer. So here we're talking about extending the catabolic phase or intermittent fasting, which means don't eat late at night. For example, the wheel study, women who didn't eat 13 hours between the end of dinner to the start of breakfast, longer time without putting food in their body, had a 36% reduced risk of recurrence of breast cancer. These were all women who already had breast cancer, so they followed them for 10 years. After they already had a diagnosis of cancer, 36% reduced risk of recurrence or dying of breast cancer. Now, the standard American diet, of course, as you know, has all these cancer-promoting properties, all the high glycemic processed foods and oils promote cancer too, and with the animal products mixed. And of course, the money, all the anti-cancer protection is in the vegetables, and vegetables protect against cancer more than fruit does. They both protect against cancer. And the more variety of foods you have in the diet, the better. But in each cell is a mechanism built into the cell to fix broken DNA strands and to remove methylation defects that, if we're not fixed, would accumulate. And the way the body fixes them is by activating the ARE, the antioxidant response element, travels up and down the DNA like a little locomotive car, like a hand cart on the locomotive, travels up and down trying to fix things, and it's activated by dietary antioxidants. The primary activator of the ARE are the ITCs in cruciferous vegetables. That's isothiocyanates. We abbreviate ITCs. I want you to remember that term, ITCs, because ITCs are probably the most powerful cancer-protecting thing you can eat, and that's from green cruciferous vegetables. And the ITCs are the main activator of the NRF2 transcription protein, which activates the ARE, which you don't have to know that. You just have to know ITC. You don't have to know the names of the cellular machinery that fixes it. Now, my ANDI scores, the aggregate nutrient density index stands for ANDI, aggregate nutrient density index, adds up 36 different nutritional parameters that the government keeps track of in an equal caloric portion of food, so we can compare the amount of phytochemicals, antioxidants, vitamins, and minerals in one food versus another. This is just regular supermarket food from across the country. They buy the food in supermarkets, they analyze it, and they calculate the nutrients that are there. And as you can see, green vegetables are super high in nutrients, and these nutrients work synergistically. And if you're looking at the foods that you really want to focus on to maximize your body's ability to fight cancer, we need to have the full rainbow of these foods in your diet to be maximally protective against cancer. That means you want to eat those cruciferous vegetables, the top two lines there, like kale, collards, and mustard greens, are those thick and chewy leaves that are super protective. You want to get some of that in your diet, or bok choy would be in that category. Brussels sprouts would be in that category. And then you have the arugula or watercress, which are thinner leafy cruciferous vegetables, super healthy to chop some arugula, just a little bit on your salad, adds a huge amount of cancer protection, and it supplies the myrosinase enzyme, because the myrosinase enzyme is what makes the ITCs. When you eat the broccoli, I have a piece of broccoli, it's raw, and there's no ITCs in the broccoli yet. It's where you get your ITCs from, yes, but it's not in there yet. What's in there is the glucosinolates that have to be converted by the myrosinase enzyme into ITCs, which happens as you chew it. As you chew it, you break down the enzyme, you form a chemical reaction in your mouth, and you're forming ITCs as you're chewing the vegetable. The better you chew, the better, more ITCs you're forming. Now, if you put some arugula and watercress on your salad, you have some ITCs raw. So if you had some little cooked bok choy or cooked broccoli, you'd have some myrosinase enzyme inside your digestive tract. So if you destroyed some of it with cooking, you'd still have some in there to help convert some of the glucosinolate into more isothiocyanates to prevent cancer. So you'd get more cancer protection value out of the cooked vegetables you ate if you ate some raw cruciferous vegetables with that same meal. Did you follow that? No? That's okay, we're going to go over it later. So lettuces and cabbages on your salad, shredded red cabbage or Savoy cabbage, broccoli and Brussels sprouts. We want to eat some solid vegetables like artichokes, broccoli, Brussels sprouts. We want to eat red and orange things like tomatoes and carrots. And we definitely want to use that onion family, that allium family of onion, scallion, leek, and garlic. And you want to put leeks and scallions in your soups. And you want to put scallions and red onion and shallots raw on your salads. You want to use them cooked and raw. I'm going to discuss that, how to maximize production of the soup too. Your mushrooms, we want to be cooked, not raw, because mushrooms have a mild carcinogen called agarotine. We want it to cook off, and then we want to eat the pomegranates, berries, tomatoes for those other bioflavonoids, and we want to have some seeds. We're going to talk about seeds too, all these anti-cancer effects. And then if you have cancer or a high risk of cancer, you want to drink super juice regularly. Maybe you have a glass every other day or a glass a day of some kind of super juice. What's a super juice? It's not a fruit juice, it's a vegetable juice. It's like a third, maybe a third or a fifth of it, a fifth to a third would be cruciferous, like bok choy and kale juice. Maybe a third would be like lettuce and cucumber and celery or peppers. And then a third would be like the high carotenoid, like carrot and beet, tomato, a third of the high color, and you add some sweetness to it. But you don't make a fruit juice. You make the person who has propensity for cancer has cancer. You want to flood the tissues with those antioxidants and phytochemicals. 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. You got it? 1/3 cruciferous, 1/3 benign like lettuce and cucumber and tomato, and 1/3 carrot and beet to have that juice. And I was talking earlier, if we look at risk reduction from cancer on various foods we compare, the mushrooms give you a tremendous amount of cancer protection. See, the line goes straight up. That means a little bit of mushrooms straight up gives you a lot of protection. But if you eat a lot more mushrooms, you're already up there with a little bit of mushrooms. It already gave you a lot of protection from the little bit of mushrooms you ate. So eat a little bit of mushrooms every day. You don't have to eat a huge amount of mushroom, because a little bit shoots you right up. And then, of course, the next line is tomatoes and peppers and carrots and beets and tomatoes, those colorful carotenoid vegetables. You eat some of those, it gives you protection against cancer, but once you eat a certain amount, you've reached maximum protection. You follow that? And the green line stands for the green vegetables. It gives you a huge amount of protection, but here it doesn't level off. A little bit doesn't give you so much protection. You've got to eat larger amounts to get that full protection, and it keeps going up the more you eat and the more you eat. Your diet should contain a lot of green vegetables, both raw and cooked, for maximum protection against cancer. So we're talking here now about women who have cancer already. The Women's Healthy Eating and Living Study, I studied the women who had cancer. More than 3,000 women with breast cancer now, compared 3 servings a day of green vegetables to a half a serving, and breast cancer recurrence dropped more than 50% over that 10-year period. They didn't eat a vegan diet. They weren't eating a Nutritarian diet. They just gave them 3 servings of vegetables a day compared to a half. Cancer rates dropped more than 50% in women who had cancer, and most were still eating cheese, eggs, and meat. And cancer rates still dropped by 50% with the 3 servings of green vegetables a day. And the study showed that the people who ate fruits and vegetables were more powerful than just eating vegetables when they had fruit and vegetables, and they did blood carotenoid levels on these women too. And carotenoids, of course, you get from colorful foods. You get the beta-carotene from the orange foods like sweet potato and squashes and carrots, and you get lycopene from the red things like tomatoes and peppers and papaya and watermelon. You get that lycopene. Then you get that lutein from green vegetables. The color is green vegetable lutein. Actually, a blood level for lutein is the best predictor of heart attack and cancer because it tracks on how many green vegetables you're eating. Not that lutein's doing all the work, but it's a marker of how much greens you're eating. But in this study, they tracked blood carotenoids, and they found it was predictor of life and death, how much vegetables are in. You could see the blood carotene level just on people's skin. You can see how people have a slight orange tinge, or they're pale and fleshy and pink looking when they don't eat a lot of vegetables. So you can just see it. Just visually see it run on people. They have a machine, you can put your hand in, it measures your blood carotenoid just by you putting a laser on your skin. You can see it with your eyes, and you can tell when people don't eat well how pasty they look, right? Because we know in studies we actually can put cells from the human body in a test tube and measure the methylation defects, and we have a test available today called the IV gene test, actually, which can measure methylation defects in your DNA. And with enough methylation defects, the IV gene people tell you have cancer. It's a test that can detect cancer, or before a mammogram can detect cancer, because it can measure the amount of methylation defects you have. And this new testing ability enables scientists to say, okay, let's feed these people a lot of green vegetables, and you can see the methylation defects starting to go away. Low vegetable diets, high methylation defects. High vegetable diets, we don't see much methylation, high risk of cancer. So it's clearly evident in simple studies doctors can do right in there, and scientists can measure today very easily. And not just animal protein raises breast cancer, but animal fats do, and so does eating cholesterol from eggs raise breast cancer too. So we're talking here studies on 13 studies, and of course the egg companies do all these, they design studies to make eggs look okay. They'll give you like a diet very, very high in meat and cheese, and they'll try to modulate egg intake and say it didn't matter when you took the egg out because the person was already eating a lot of barbecue, already eating a lot of hamburgers. They're like doing the best they can to show eggs don't have an effect. But when we look at the data, it's really clear, if we're not done by the egg companies, the meta-analysis, the analysis of all the studies, show a very stronger risk of cancer even from 2 eggs a week. Just 2 eggs a week, and dramatically increased risk of breast cancer. And women who eat any eggs are 77% more likely to develop diabetes. Even 1 egg a week increases risk of developing diabetes by 77%, because obviously egg whites are high in, promote IGF-1 very powerfully because they're very concentrated protein, and egg yolks are full of cholesterol, which impairs insulin uptake and insulin function. And diabetics who ate eggs, twice as likely to die in the 20-year period under investigation, who ate any eggs at all. Let's look at breast cancer in Korea. Because in Korea, in 1988, they had 1/10 the amount of breast cancer that we had in this country. 1/10 the amount of breast cancer, they must be doing something a little better than us. Let's look at the way they were eating back then. And don't forget, it's what they were eating 30 years before 1988 that determines the breast cancer rates in 1988, right? So And then, of course, in 2008, just 20 years later, their breast cancer rates go up by 500% in Korea. Still half as much as we have, but if they jump by, in that short period of time, just in 20 years, they increased 500%. What's the change in the Korean diet that happened during that period? Well, let's look at that too. Well, they were eating 6.5% of animal products, like most other Asian countries, in the 1960s and 50s, 1960s and 1970s, but then they picked up to 9%, they get wealthier, and by 2007 they're already eating about 15% of calories from animal products. Still half as much as we're eating, by the way, but look how much oil they went from 1.5% to 12%. They started eating more oil and fried foods. So fried foods were not that prevalent in the Asian countries until recent years, more recently, and most of their vegetables were not fried. They were walked in vegetables and water and liquids and things like that. And then sugars. Look how the sugar consumption and soft drink consumption and sweeteners went up, more than doubled, of course, by 2007. And now, of course, the breast cancer rates in South Korea have gone up even more because there's more, McDonald's and Pizza Hut and Burger King, whatever it is. Or is it Burger Hut and Pizza King? I don't know. So to review, medical care is the third leading cause of death in this country after heart attacks, strokes, and cancers. Medical care is the third leading, and it's very underestimated because those are just the known deaths from medical care. Most of the deaths are, because most medical drugs cause cancer, and all those cancer deaths aren't caused by death aren't measured as being death by medical care. Did you follow that? The drugs doctors give people cause cancer. Insulin causes cancer, obviously, and they overtreat people with insulin because they're having on a diet that necessitates people taking a lot of insulin. They don't change the diet, so you need normal amounts of insulin. They tell diabetics to take as much insulin as they want to keep their sugars down on this high carbohydrate American diet, which pushes insulin through the roof. But also, of course, they used to give women estrogen, which increased risk of breast cancer tremendously. Breast cancers did tail off in the last 10 years because doctors stopped prescribing as much estrogen for women postmenopausally. And women stopped smoking as much. The major source of the cancer deaths going down was the stopping in smoking and doctors less prescribing. But statin drugs and antibiotics and calcium channel blockers and other blood pressure medications increase the risk of cancer. A recent study showed that women taking calcium channel blockers for blood pressure lowering had double the risk of breast cancer over a 10-year period compared to women not taking calcium channel blockers. ACE inhibitors increase risk of cancer. A lot of blood pressure medications increase risk of cancer, and studies show statin drugs increase risk of breast cancer and also increase risk of invasive or deadly breast cancer. And you go to doctors for your heart disease and high blood pressure, and they give you drugs that increase risk of breast cancer. But when you die of breast cancer, it doesn't get marked down as medical care being a cause. How do you prevent taking these drugs? You eat a healthy diet so you don't have high blood pressure and high cholesterol. Then you don't have to take drugs that cause breast cancer. By the way, the drugs also accelerate your rate of heart disease too, because as you get older, your blood vessels become less elastic, and now you have to be on multiple drugs to lower your blood pressure from damaging the brain, but it pushes your diastolic to get your systolic blood pressure in the favorable range, you had to push your diastolic too low. And the low diastolic prevents the blood from coming back to the heart fast enough, and then you develop atrial fibrillation, irregular heartbeat due to the blood pressure medications. Then they got to put you on Coumadin and blood thinners and Xarelto and these drugs to thin the blood because now you have atrial fibrillation, and those cause reflux esophagitis, gastrointestinal bleeding, hemorrhagic stroke. They further increase the risk of death. Oh, but then you got gastrointestinal, then you got some gastritis. You better take a drug for that, like Prilosec or Nexium. But that increases the risk of heart attack. Oh, but that increases the risk of osteoporosis. Well, I forgot to tell you that the osteoporosis drug increases the risk of atrial fibrillation, but they'll give you a drug for that, but that increases the risk of, you know what I'm saying? Every drug increases the risk of another disease, and they give you a drug for that, and that increases the risk of the first disease, and this vicious cycle. They try to stop the drugs. It's too late because once you're on those drugs for osteoporosis, they stay in your bloodstream for 10 years. Once it causes atrial fibrillation, you've got it for 10 years now from that if it's drug-induced, because the drug stays there circulating for years and years. Can't get out of your tissues. And lastly, don't forget folic acid supplementation. People are popping pills, vitamin pills that have folic acid in them. Folic acid is not folate. Folic acid is made from petroleum. It's synthetic, and because it's absorbed into the cells too readily, the cells can't keep it out, it drives cellular replication. And you've got folic acid added to processed foods, added to grains, to wheat, and added to soy milk, and added to vitamin pills, and they're telling you to take it when you're pregnant. You see a healthy diet has green vegetables in it. Anything slightly resembling a healthy diet is super high in folate. A person eating a healthy diet has very high levels of folate in their blood. Now, just because they determine that deficiencies of folate cause neural tube defects and birth defects doesn't mean our population should be taking synthetic folic acid. They should be eating green vegetables. Here's what I'm saying. I'm saying the medical profession prescribing folic acid for pregnant women to prevent neural tube defects has causing an epidemic of childhood cancer and birth defects and autism and brain tumors. How come? How come? Do you understand what I'm saying here? You see, because the lack of green vegetables in the diet is linked to folate deficiency, yes, but the lack of green vegetables is also linked to higher rates of brain tumors and childhood cancer in the offspring. So by giving people a folic acid pill, now the woman doesn't have to eat green vegetables because she thinks she's getting her folic acid pill done, so she can still eat the same diet that's going to cause more childhood cancer. And now the folic acid pill causes breast cancer in the baby and the child, and folic acid increases risk of autism, learning disabilities, and immune suppression. What the medical profession is starting a whole vicious cycle toying with nature. You know what I mean? They think they know more than the diet designed for our species by the natural world. You know what I'm saying? We're meant to be eating green vegetables. You can't replace green vegetables with a drug or a pill made from petroleum. Folic acid supplementation increases risk of cancer. Now, natural foods inhibit cancer naturally. They naturally prevent blood vessels from fueling cancer, and they prevent cancer from growing on your body when you eat these natural G-bombs. The mushrooms, the onions, garlic, soybeans, berries, green vegetables inhibit body fat. It's not about just calories in it. It's not about how many calories you eat. It's also about whether you eat the right type of calories. Some type of calories promote fat storage, especially insulin promotes fat storage. When you eat sweets, and when you eat meats and you take steroids, you're going to be promoting fat on your body. And you're promoting angiogenesis, promoting tumors, and promoting cancer. The G-bombs is that an acronym that focuses on the foods with the most powerful anti-cancer effects. And now we're going to go over some of these foods in detail, particularly the ITCs in green cruciferous vegetables, like collard greens and kale and arugula and Brussels sprouts and bok choy and watercress and cabbage, are very important because they have a cell with glucosinolates in the center of the cell, and the glucosinolate, the G in the center, is converted into the ITCs while you break down the cell wall. When you chew it, when you break down the cell wall, you have that myrosinase enzyme in that cell wall, right? You see the myrosinase enzyme? It's in a little packet, like a little fibrous packet that you have to break it down when you chew it, and then it mixes with the glucosinolate, forming the ITCs. The only problem is that myrosinase is heat sensitive. So if you cook the vegetable first long enough, you'll destroy the myrosinase. You won't have the anti-cancer potential of that broccoli, of that kale, of that bok choy, of that watercress, of that arugula. You've got to eat it raw, okay? That's right. The person just said, what about you juice it? Now, I'm going to make a pot of soup right now. I'm going to prepare this pot of soup. And I want to make this anti-cancer soup. I want to put mushrooms in there. I want to put beans in there. I want to put carrot juice and tomato juice and celery juice and water and spices and turmeric and onion and mushroom. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to put kale in it. I think today I'm going to make it with collard greens or with mustard greens or turnip greens. You know why? Because my family eats so much kale because it's so mild tasting that I'd rather not save the kale for when they're eating it just plain the kale dish, the California cream kale. I'd rather put a different green vegetable in the soup because they're already eating so much kale. You follow me? I'm going to use like some other green that they don't usually eat some other cruciferous green to give them more variety in their diet. So I'll pick some other green vegetables I saw at the market. So I'm going to get some turnip greens and put it in there. A little more bitter, but once it's cooked in the soup, you don't taste the bitterness anyway. But here's the secret. I'm not going to put the turnip greens in the soup and then take it out when it's cooked. I'm going to put the raw turnip greens in the blender. And I'm going to ladle just a little of the liquid from the soup in there just so it blends to make like a slurry. So I'm going to blend up the cell walls in my Vitamix first. I'm grinding it up, making that slurry. A chemical reaction is occurring in my blender. I'm breaking down the myrosinase, forming the ITCs, and now I can take that green slurry of the blended up mustard greens or turnip greens. I'm going to pour them into the soup now. Or the broccoli rabe has a nice bitter taste. It's great for soups too. Now I'm going to pour that into the soup because the heat of the soup now won't destroy the ITCs. Because once they're formed, the ITCs are heat stable, but they would not have been formed had I cooked the vegetable first and then creamed it into the soup base. Did you follow that? Now you're understanding it better, right? And so I'm going to maximize my production of ITCs because now I'm going to put my cabbage, my Savoy cabbage and my broccoli and my snow pea pods in a wok and I'm going to cook it. But I'm going to put a timer on my cell phone. I'm only going to cook it for 5 or 6 minutes. So it's not going to lose so still some myrosinase activity. It's a little bit soft. And then I'll take off the flame off and I'll put my sauce on top. I'll make my sauce by making a hemp seed, a little coconut, a little bit of turmeric, a little lemongrass, a little bit of, I'll put some spices, then I'll make this delicious sauce and I'll pour it on and I'll mix it up there with maybe a minute more of cooking. So I finished making my dinner in 10 minutes, but I didn't overcook it. And you know what? I got more ITCs even from the moderately cooked broccoli and cabbage in the wok because I had some salad that had some watercress in it or had some arugula in it. And I already had a lot of myrosinase in my stomach. But you know what? The myrosinase enzyme doesn't get destroyed in 4 minutes or 5 minutes of cooking. It actually gets absorbed very readily and very utilizable and works great with 3 or 4 or 5 minutes of cooking. It's only when you cook from 5 minutes to 6 minutes it starts to go down, and 6 minutes to 8 or 9 or 10 minutes it starts to go down a lot. It's with 10 minutes or more of cooking it really drops off and you almost get no myrosinase production. But it's okay to cook it in a wok for like 5 or 6 minutes. Are you following me right now? I just gave you 3 or 4 ways to increase ITC exposure. You getting some of what I'm saying here? Eat a little raw ITCs with your salad, increases the raw ITCs from the cooked vegetables. Don't cook it as long. Blend it before you put it in your soups. So the same thing I just said to you about cruciferous vegetables, and we know that cruciferous vegetables are the most powerfully protective against cancer, even been shown in people who have cancer. They stop cancer deaths, right? 62% reduction in total death in a study of 4,800 breast cancer patients from people who ate cruciferous vegetables every day. Look at that, 62% reduction in death. They ate healthy all whole life. And they just had cruciferous vegetables after they got cancer. Imagine how protective it is if you do it before you get cancer. Anything you can do to help you when you get cancer is only a small fraction of the benefit had you done that behavior way years and years earlier. A small fraction of the benefit. And a 50% reduction in breast cancer, even in women with the GSTP1 gene like Angelina Jolie. So these people who are genetically predisposed to ovarian and breast cancer are helped tremendously by green cruciferous vegetables, and they're helped more by the synergistic effect of all the G-bombs, much more than just 62%. The highest consumer of onions have between a 56 and 88% reduction of all common cancers, colon cancer, ovarian cancer, prostate cancer, breast cancer, huge protection from just a small amount of onion every day. Raw. Because the alliinase enzyme in onion is heat sensitive. It's spelled A-L-L-I-I-N-A-S-E, 2 L's and 2 I's, extra points for Scrabble. It's the only word that has those double L and double I. But here's the thing. You know when you cut an onion, how it causes your eyes to tear? And that's forming acid, sulfenic acid. That means the chemical reaction is occurring in your kitchen. That's forming the anti-cancer effects. That's where all the organosulfide compounds are forming that prevent cancer. If you put the onion and boiled it in the soup first, and then you took it out of the soup with the tongs, and then you cut it, you'd have deactivated the alliinase enzyme. You wouldn't form the anti-cancer benefits. You don't put the onion to cook in your soup. You take the onion or your scallion or your leek, and I'll take that leek and I'll cut off the root, and I'll cut just a little bit off the top where it's more frayed. But the whole leek, I'll cut down the middle and use the whole leek, wash the dirt out, and maybe cut it in half and blend it in the blender with some onion, with some scallion maybe. I'll ladle just a little soup liquid in there to get it blending. I want to blend it and cream it while it's still raw so I don't deactivate the alliinase enzyme, so I form the maximum amount of disulfides and trisulfides, which prevent cancer and lower blood sugar and lower blood pressure and prevent heart attacks and prevent strokes. Onions prevent strokes and lower blood pressure and lower cholesterol. And onions are rich in quercetin and other precursors that fuel the growth of the beneficial bacteria in your gut. Remember I told you earlier, I think last night, that there are 2 cooked foods and 2 raw foods that maximally thicken the biofilm that line the villi in your small intestines to slow the glycemic effect of everything you eat. How do you turn a high glycemic mango or a moderately glycemic mango into a low glycemic food? You eat these 4 foods. What are those 4 foods? All right, let's do the 2 raw ones. What are the 2 raw ones? Right, green cruciferous vegetables and onion or scallion. And what are the 2 cooked foods? Mushrooms and beans. Right. You eat these 4 foods, you maximize the benefit of all those foods together, and we're trying to put some raw onion into our soup, and we're trying to shred some raw onion and put it on our salad, and we're putting some raw scallion on our salad too. We're eating it with a nut-based dressing to maximize absorption, but I got those sulfates in my soup as well because I took that whole leek and I blended it up before I put it into the soup, because the heat does not destroy the organosulfide compounds, but it would have prevented their formation if I cooked it before it was creamed or blended or crushed. Did you follow that? Now, mushrooms are an integral part of the human immune system. It's almost like our immune system is designed to be dependent on mushrooms. Certainly, without question, it's designed to be dependent on green vegetables. We are dependent on green vegetables, or you can't have a normal immune system. Green vegetables are not optional. They're part of the anatomy of a primate. They're needed for a primate to function just normally. But mushrooms are the most powerful angiogenesis inhibitors, but the mushrooms have aromatase inhibitors. You know what aromatase inhibitors are? The medications like tamoxifen and Arava, they give them women with breast cancer to lower their estrogen. Well, the aromatase inhibitors in mushrooms are particularly effective against breast and prostate cancer, and particularly effective at protecting the breast from being stimulated with estrogen. Studies very powerfully show how protective how protective mushrooms are against breast cancer. A 64% low risk of breast cancer for women eating an average of 10 grams of mushrooms a day, which is the size of your thumb. That's like 1 mushroom a day just decreases risk of breast cancer because it has that aromatase inhibiting in it. And it has angiogenesis, and it's also got antigen binding lectins, which means that the mushrooms have certain features that adhere to the cell wall of cells that are abnormal. So the immune system can recognize them for destruction, removal, and killing that cell before it can become cancerous, called apoptosis. It directs the activity of the natural killer T cells. So eating mushrooms on a regular basis, eating a variety of mushrooms on a regular basis. You don't have to eat a lot of them, but you have to try to eat them regularly because they have powerful anti-cancer effects. I mean, there are almost no calories in them anyway. So they promote weight loss anyway because they're a weight loss promoting food, but they fill you up with no calories. And then berries are shockingly protective. And this category of berries includes cherries, pomegranates, and tomatoes, we're in that berry category, okay? They're super protective against cancer. They even shock the scientists because they give even people berry extracts or berry powders, and they were able to reverse cancers. They did a study on squamous cell precancerous esophageal lesions in the throat, squamous cell epithelial lesions that were cancerous, and they gave these berry powders, and the cancers reversed themselves because the scientists can go in there and put like swabs in and test the cancer very easily and see what reverses it. The point is that these foods are very rich in color. And you know what the best type of berry is, the most healthiest type of berry you could eat practically? The really black ones, like the ones with like blackberries and those small wild blueberries. And you know how you buy them? Frozen. At least I do. Because on the East Coast, if we get fresh blueberries that are not frozen or fresh, they get mold on them in like a day or two, or fresh strawberries. They don't keep, and they put a lot of fungicide on the non-organic strawberries. But they don't put fungicide on the ones they freeze. And the frozen wild blueberries are those ones, even if they're not organic, they're not treated with a fungicide, and they have no pesticide residue on them anyway, because they don't put pesticides on the wild blueberries. They only can't mention the word organic because they put some fungicide on the plant when they're very small. It's for the plant to be to not get, to grow, but they don't, once they're in the stages where they're getting berry production, they don't no longer be treating them anyway. But when you buy a frozen wild blueberry, you can just take some out of the frozen pack and just use what you're needing. It's a third of the price of fresh anyway, at least on the East Coast. And then when you're taking it out, it doesn't go bad. You can just put a little bit out and close the pack up, put it back in your freezer. So there's no waste. When we're buying fresh berries, if you don't eat them the day you buy them, or some days they're even moldy before you get them home from the supermarket. They're already moldy. Now, seeds are very powerfully protective against cancer. We're talking here about the lignins fight cancer, and the lignins are highest in flax and chia seeds. Number one is flax seeds. Flax seeds have about 21 milligrams of lignin per tablespoon. That's about 7 milligrams per teaspoon. Do you follow that? Very highest in almost any other food in the world. They're tremendously protective against cancer, both prostate and breast cancer. And let's look at a study. Here's a study with women who had breast cancer, and they tracked them for 10 years. And those that ate a third of a milligram of lignin a day, that's a third of 1 milligram. Don't forget, a tablespoon of flaxseed has 21 milligrams. So that's a third of 1 milligram, had a 71% decreased risk of dying of breast cancer, just from having a third of a milligram. And that was already when they had cancer. What if they took it in their diet before they got cancer? It would be even more protective. More greens, more beans, more nuts and seeds, dramatically lower glycemic load. They give you the right level of IGF-1. They protect your immune system as you age. They reduce diabetic and cardiovascular parameters. They help restore and maintain the vascular elasticity, preventing high blood pressure. And the 4 foods to thicken the protective biofilm, we went over that, right? The onions, the mushrooms, the green vegetables. We want to eat those foods on a regular part of our diet. So the pyramid, of course, puts vegetables at the base. This is a vegetable. It has fruit in the diet, but fruit is not the mostly what we eat. Fruit's like having a piece of fruit or two for dessert. But the main portion of the meal is mostly vegetables and beans and some whole grains, but not brown rice, because brown rice is now contaminated with arsenic. You can use other whole grains. A whole intact grain, that doesn't mean grind the grain into a high glycemic pastry flour, into a powder and make a bread out of it. It means eat the whole grain intact. Like cook it with water, like steel-cut oats or quinoa that's cooked in water. And if you want extra protection against cancer, put those spices on your food. Those herbs like dill and oregano and turmeric has a lot of powerful extra anti-cancer benefits, anti-proliferative and apoptotic effects. It helps the body identify abnormal cells like mushrooms do. And it also has anti-angiogenic effects, because now you know what that word angiogenesis means, right? Turmeric has powerful anti-angiogenic effects. Add it to your salad dressing. Make a sauce for your vegetables and add it to the sauce. Add it to the soups. And green tea and green tea extract also has a very powerful effect to fight cancer. Even shown to be effective in studies of women who already have cancer. Because we do these studies on women who have cancer, because it takes too long to find a result if you start to you can't follow them for 50 years. So we try to usually pick women that are close to death already, and then we give them an intervention to see if it helps them. You know what I mean? If it helps them, it's going to help everybody. And then, of course, we discussed folic acid supplement. Here's a 10-year study of multivitamins with folic acid increasing risk of breast cancer by 20 to 30%. A 6-year study in Norway, folic acid supplement increased risk of death for cancer by 43%. And that's later on in life. People are taking these supplements their whole life. And of course, the opposite is from food-derived folate. We eat green vegetables and beans. Greens and beans are super high in folate anyway. What would you need folic acid supplement for? Even taking a folate supplement wouldn't be healthy for you, because you already have so much folate in your body already, but certainly not folic acid, which is much more dangerous than having a supplement of real folate. Folic acid is the cheap version that is synthetic and is more dangerous. But these supplemental ingredients also increase the risk of cancer. We've got to be cautious at taking vitamin A, even the vitamin A in the fortified soy milk. Vitamin A is acetyl palmitate and retinol palmitate, have been shown to increase the risk of cancer. Just like you make too much IGF-1 when you eat so much animal protein, if you take in beta carotene and all the carotenes from food, you make the right amount of vitamin A. When you take it preformed, you overshoot. Too much vitamin A increases the risk of cancer. We shouldn't be taking beta carotene or vitamin A in supplements. Vitamin E increases the risk of cancer. When you take vitamin E from food, you get plenty in nuts and seeds and green vegetables, but you get a full spectrum of 8 different types of vitamin E. When you take a supplement, you just take one spectrum. Taking one spectrum, it creates an imbalance of vitamin E absorption, just like beta-carotene does. There's 100 different carotenoids. We don't just want to take one. It could be dangerous to take one. You don't want to take copper and iron, but however, some people need iron because they're iron deficient. But if you have adequate iron, then taking iron could not be beneficial, may be hurtful, especially in men who don't bleed regularly. We don't want men taking iron. But there are some women who need iron when they're bleeding from having menstrual periods, and some women need iron postmenopausally when they're not bleeding because they're not good absorbers of iron, and the only way to know if iron is safe to take is by taking a blood test, because you shouldn't be taking iron if your ferritin is above 50. That means your iron stores already are adequate. You should only need taking iron if your iron stores, if you're deficient in iron. But vitamin A and folic acid are the two riskiest, most dangerous ingredients, most linked to shorter lifespan, the most dangerous things to supplement. And vitamin D, too much vitamin D, could also increase risk of breast cancer as well. And some people are taking like 5,000, 10,000 units, taking too much. The studies show that breast cancer mortality is increased when your blood test is over 60. The point I'm making is the most protection occurs when your blood level is between 25 and 45. When you drive your levels up too high, too little is bad, but too much is bad too. Both vitamin D deficiency can increase risk of cancer, like breast cancer, and vitamin D excess also can increase risk of cancer. You want to be in that sweet spot of not too high and not too low. So a Nutritarian diet, to review what you've learned today and this weekend, you learn to include these foods that work synergistically, that have dramatic anti-cancer benefits. You want to eat raw scallions and raw onion every day. You want to eat raw green cruciferous every day. You want to eat some cooked mushrooms, some cooked beans, some berries, pomegranates, cherries, or tomatoes, some flax seeds or chia seeds every day. How many people eat flax seeds or chia seeds every day? How many people don't? About half and half. Isn't that crazy? Because you just put a little bit on almost anything you're eating, but the point is that people don't know this information. How could people not know how protective flax seeds and mushrooms are against cancer? How could women in this country not know this? They'll run to their doctor to get mammograms, but they won't take flax seeds and mushrooms in their diet? This is crazy. If there was a pill made from the drug company that could reduce the risk of cancer by 80%, people would be paying $800 a month for it, maybe more than that even, right? But pennies to take some flax seeds they won't do, because it's not marketed to them like a drug. The craziness, the insanity of our country. So here's some cases. Before we break up here, let me just give you a couple of examples of patients of mine. Here's Pam, who came to me in 1997 with ovarian cancer that had metastasized to her lung, and she was given 3 months to live. 4 liters of fluid were extracted from her lung. She's doing great, and she's alive today and thriving. What's that, 21 years later? She has no cancer. She's vibrant. She's youthful. 20 years later, she's in great health. She's almost 70 years old today. Lee Gersted had breast cancer metastatic to the bones in 1995, refused chemotherapy, given 6 months to live, made a complete recovery. I'm not saying this happens in most cases, but the fact that it even happens, and I have patients who have, and scores and scores of men with prostate cancer who just went away when they eat right. They follow the protocol. It's pretty simple, a Nutritarian diet with a glass of juice every day, and it goes away. The reality is you don't have to get cancer. And a Nutritarian diet contains the full portfolio of anti-cancer foods. It's designed to utilize all that's when you get the most power to prevent cancer, utilizing the full portfolio of anti-cancer foods and learning fantastic, delicious tasting recipes that make this portfolio of anti-cancer foods taste great. And that's what I have some books here today. The books I have here are The End of Dieting, which talks more about food addiction and emotional overeating and how people can lose weight and keep it off permanently. And of course, Super Immunity, which is talking about what we talked about in this lecture, how to improve your immune system and fight cancer. And I think I have, what other book do I have here? I have The End of Dieting. Yeah, I mentioned The End of Dieting. And I have Fast Food Genocide, right, which is my newest book. So I'll be here with talking to people and signing books over there after this presentation. And of course, I have other books that might be right for you. I have the Eat to Live cookbook and an Eat to Live Quick and Easy cookbooks. There's more than 1,500 recipes on my website When people who join as members, they get, you communicate with people, they rate the recipes, they contribute recipes. There's Nutritarian chefs in restaurants across the country, people to get together and have dinner clubs and dinner parties and all kinds of things. And the trick is here to get the emotional support you need from your family, from your neighbors, that we got to do this collectively. We have to do, you have to kind of cultivate a community of friends and that are going to support you in your effort to live a healthy life. So again, my website is drfuhrman.com, and my research, I'm the president of the Nutritional Research Foundation, and that's nutritionalresearch.org. The Nutritional Research Foundation is a nonprofit organization that starts and initiates and funds research studies to fight cancer and to fight and reverse disease using nutritional excellence. Great talking to you guys. Been such a pleasure.